you can see on the last slide, Sochi, some of our clients, including, in fact, indeed, EETT and GSMA, which on this slide are also sitting together. So they'll explain a little bit what we do with them. But without any wait, let's start with the first presentation. So the floor is to Soichi to talk about 10 gigabits plans. I mean, what's happening over there? That's part of the future, obviously, but that's already present in some markets. I mean.
Thank you. So let me just find the right presentation. Hope you're seeing it now. Yeah,
not full screen, but yeah, we can see it.
There we go. Great. Okay, thank you very much, Vincent, and hello to all the attendees. So yeah, without further ado, I will spend a quick 10 minutes or so speaking about what our system shows us in terms of 10 gigabits per second fiber connections. There we go. So it's very quickly a quick introduction. So basically, I'm going to show you in this presentation 3 slides. As you can see on the left there, under contents. So the first, I will give a quick overview of the current landscape of what I've called megaspeed fiber. And then on the second slide, I will show the price difference between 1 gig and the megaspeed fibers of 8 gigabits or more. Followed by a final slide, which shows a little bit of the evolution of the price for 1 gig and 8 gigabit plus speeds. On the right-hand side there, you see the 10 countries we are covering today. And I've mentioned so mega speed, mega fast fiber, because depending on the country, it's not necessarily 10 gigs per second, but for example, in Belgium, you get 8.5 gigs, in France, you get 8 gigs, etc. So, but just for simplicity's sake, for this presentation, when I talk about fast, mega, that kind of gigabits per second speed, I'm talking about all these 10 countries at once, the highest speed that you can get in that country. So before just jumping into the findings, however, I'll just quickly talk about the methodology. I'll keep it simple. So as Vincent mentioned a few minutes ago, we at Tarifica have what we call the Telecom Pricing Intelligence Platform, or TPIP for short. And this allows us essentially to dynamically benchmark and tell us any plan, the cheapest plan per operator, per country, which satisfies any criteria that we give it. So for this presentation, as you can see on the left here, basically within the requirements that needs to be satisfied, I set the minimum download speed to be 8,008 megabits per second. And I wanted it to be a fiber connection. And then in terms of everything else, I'm not overly interested, you know, again, for simplicity's sake for today's presentation. So for example, does it include landline voice as well? Does it include TV? Is it triple play? Is it quadruple play? This kind of thing we are not really looking at today. So really, essentially, we're looking today at what is the cheapest plan per operator per country that offers at least 8 gigabits per second speed fiber. So so just to let you know, I'm going to go quite fast, but you will get the slides after. So don't worry if you miss anything that I'm going to be talking about in this presentation. So first, a quick overview of the most recent data we have, which is Q3 of 2024. So I've decided to use a quick box plot for this one. So as you can see here, we have a few, despite it being a box plot, we have a few countries which are just simply lines. So Belgium, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Spain, these 6 countries. 5 countries, sorry. So what this single line tells us is that there's only one provider in that country which offers the mega fast fiber, which more often than not tends to be the incumbent operator. On the other side, so we have places like Singapore where we have a big box. So the big box essentially tells us that there is a big price difference depending on the provider. So in Singapore, we have a provider who offers 10 gigs per second speeds for around $110 US, adjusted for PPP, basically power parity. Whereas a cheaper provider in the same country, Singapore, will give you 10 gigabits per second for roughly $40. The smaller boxes, for example, Japan and France, this means that there are several operators that provide the fast fiber, but the price difference is quite minimal between those providers. And last but not least, for example, Switzerland is quite interesting in that we have a little whisker going downwards here, which basically tells us that there is one operator within Switzerland who is very aggressive and offering a very low price compared to the others who are providing the service for a higher price. So I hope that gives you a kind of a quick overview of what the pricing is like and who offers it within the 10 countries that we're looking at today. So moving on, the price difference between 1 gigabits per second speed and the mega fast fiber speeds. So the first kind of obvious observation, before I go into that, quick explanation of the actual graph. So the blue bars are the average prices of the 1 gigabits per second speed of that country against the pink, which is the price of the mega fast broadband, the mega fast fiber. So what we can see here, for example, is in Belgium and in Portugal and in the US, the 3 most expensive countries for 10 gig. We can see that for the 1 gig, the blue bar, they are also the 3 most expensive. And then on top of that, as you can see in the numbers that are written there, the price premium to go from 1 gig to mega fast fiber is also the largest. So essentially, these 2 countries, 1 gig is expensive already. And then to go to 10 gig, you have to pay even more, and it becomes very expensive. So a few interesting observations there already. So that is in terms of absolute terms, but it's also interesting to note Poland here, because although in terms of the actual price itself, you can get mega fast fiber for less than $100. If you want to go from 1 gig to the mega fast fiber, then you essentially have to pay double or 97% more. So we can see that actually it's Poland out of these 10 countries where, in percentage terms, the premium to get to that fast fiber is the largest. And then just quickly on the other side of the scale, we have places like Switzerland and Japan, where the price you have to pay to get the premium to go from 1 gig to the mega fast is relatively small. So roughly a bit more than $10, or in percentage terms, 15 to 20%. And then the final slide that I'm going to show you today is a little bit of evolution. So compared to the last 6 quarters, how has the price changed? So as you can see already, I've picked 2 countries which are very different. On the left, we have Singapore, and on the right, we have France. So it's quite amazing, actually, Singapore. I think it's a very interesting graph, this one. So again, here, the blue line represents the 1 gigabit per second speed prices, and the red represents the 10 gig per second speed fiber. So as you can see, back in Q2 of 2023, 10 gig fiber was available, but extremely expensive. You'd have to pay 4 times more what you'd pay for 1 gig to receive the 10 gig. But over time, as you can see, the price has continued to drop. And as of Q3, so last quarter 2024, we see now that the price difference is around $30. So it's much more of an acceptable price difference or premium. On the right here, we have France, which is a very different story. So initially, in France, the max you can get at the moment is 8 gigs per second. But essentially, if you wanted 8 gigabits per second, you pay just a little bit more compared to what you'd pay for 1 gig. So that was the case a year and a half ago. And then at the beginning of this year, so Q1 2024, they opened the gap a little bit in France. So essentially, the premium you have to pay to get to 8 gig has increased a little bit from the beginning of this year. So the aim of today is not to kind of go through the analysis and think about why, but just to finish a little bit of a one potential explanation, I think, which is possible, is just a kind of a cultural difference. So in countries like Singapore and others in the Far East, like Japan, where I'm from, and South Korea, places like that, there's this general mindset and willingness, especially for the geeks, should we say, the people who like premium. They almost pride themselves in getting the things first, and they'd almost pay anything to be in that select elite of having the best of the best of the best. So in that sense, Singapore, one could say, took that approach to first catch those very early adopters, and then as time goes by, with more players entering, with more governments intervention, things like that, the prices come down to be available to more of the general mass. Conversely, in France and in the West in general, people tend to be much more unwilling, and they'd much rather pay nothing extra to receive as much as they can. And so in that sense, they try to keep the premium low as possible to be able to say, look, you only have to pay a tiny little bit extra to get loads more. And then by attracting those kind of players, customers, who then kind of, for example, talk to their friends, families to say, oh, actually, 8 gigs is amazing, and I'm glad I paid the extra €5 or whatever. And then gradually they'll try to infiltrate the market that way and then charge a little bit more for the premium. So I hope I've been quick enough. I'll be told
Yeah, you're just on time. So
okay, great. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation and pass the baton to Kostas.
Yeah. So we've seen, thanks Kostas, you can prepare to share your screen. So we've seen that speed can have an influence on pricing, but that's advertised speed. That's a little bit different from the speed that you really get. We can be measured as QoS, and so this is one of the things we're going to address now with Kostas. Kostas, the floor is yours. And again, if you have any questions, please prepare them. We can give the floor, we can open the mics for people who want to ask a question, or you can ask them in the chat, in the Q&A, the question session, and I can read them for our speakers. Thank you, Kostas.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Sochi. Thank you, Vincent, for having me as a speaker in this very interesting web event. Well, I had to escape from BEREC plenary meeting number 4 that is now taking place here in Slovenia for an hour. But I think this is indeed a very interesting topic. So in my presentation, I would like to discuss an alternative approach for comparing telecom retail price levels among countries, something that is quite useful and is happening frequently for regulators. Well, as a telecoms regulator, I will start from the policy and some policy and regulatory priorities. From regulators' perspective, what regulators try to do is to use competition as the main tool to achieve better services for the consumers, and better means better quality of service, but also competitively priced services. So this is the key objective. And in this context, monitoring the price levels of retail prices for electronic communications is one of the key tasks for regulators. If we see the European Electronic Communications Code, which is the main European Union regulatory framework for electronic communications, priorities are, of course, investment for networks, competition, infrastructure-based competition, but also to ensure maximum benefits in terms of choice, quality, and prices for the consumers using competition. Also, the last couple of years, or maybe since 3 years, since the beginning of 2022, there has been long discussions in European Union, but also elsewhere, about creating an investment-friendly environment that will incentivize investments to allow faster deployment of state-of-the-art networks like FTTH or 5G. But at the same time, it seems that we need also to address the demand side. So to make these networks accessible for the end users, and of course, making services over them competitively priced. So monitoring price levels is key for regulators. And of course, we all know that there are several studies published every year comparing price level in different countries. For example, European Commission publishes the fixed and mobile broadband prices report. They have published for 2022. I assume they will publish also for 2023. Also, other institutions publish similar studies, OECD, ITU, etc. And back in 2021, we decided to run our own study and compare price levels for mobile broadband communications in Greece to 11 other countries. And we ran this first study with Tarifica in 2021, published our results, I believe, early 2022. So we compared mobile broadband price levels in Greece to 11 other countries of similar GDP as Greece. And in the conclusions and trying to analyze the results of that study, we came up with two interesting points. One is that it might be useful to consider network deployment costs and investments in network deployment and try to correlate this data with price levels, with retail price levels, and rankings in comparisons among countries. And this is, I mean, for Greece, this sounds quite reasonable, since the country presents several challenges as regards the landscape, large number of inhabited islands, a lot of mountains, 40% of population concentrated in only 2 cities. This is one point. The other point is that is included in the conclusions of that project in 2021, that it would make sense to also consider quality of services like download, upload speeds, latency, etc. When we compare retail prices and again try to correlate these two sets of data. I remember that in that study we got data from Ookla, and we did some comparisons, some basic comparisons of the cheapest tariffs in different countries, but also compare the cheapest tariffs as regards quality of service metrics, download and upload speeds. And we found that a winner tariff, I remember it was a tariff in Romania, of course, was much cheaper than the cheapest of Greece, but was also very slower than the cheapest of Greece. So this was another useful conclusion. These two conclusions of our previous study in 2021 triggered a new project with Tarifica on the development of an alternative approach, an alternative methodology to compare price levels among different countries. So we decided to propose a new methodology. And this time, countries will be compared not only based on prices of different baskets we defined, and then selecting the cheapest offering per basket, but also including 2 other criteria: network performance score, that has to do with speeds, download, upload speeds, latency, and network investment score, that has to do with investments required to deploy the network. And in this case, all 3 scores would be considered in ranking the countries. Best performing country for each of the 3 criteria gets 100 score, all the others relative to this 100, and then the 3 scores are added, are leaded to a weighted sum to produce the overall score, and of course defining the weights is a parameter of the methodology. So in the example, you see that we have a tariff for a country. We have a tariff score of 80%, a network performance score 70%, network investment score 60%, and then weights 70%, 20%, 10%. It can be anything, and we get the overall score. Of course, as regards the tariff score, again, we need to define baskets. As in all these methodologies comparing advertised prices. One parameter is how many baskets we define. The other parameter is the weight of its basket. And of course, key parameter is the minimum required content for the basket. In this case, we consider mobile baskets, and we use minimum gigabytes required for each basket and minimum minutes of voice calls required in its basket. And the least expensive plan meeting the minimum required content from each major operator in each country is collected. This is for mobile, and we have something similar for fixed. Again, The number of baskets is a parameter, weights for each basket is a parameter, and in this case, it's very simple to have minimum download speed required as the criterion for its basket. And again, the least expensive plan by each major operator is collected. Another interesting point in our methodology is the use of market share weights. So we collect cheapest plans from all operators in each country. One way to go is, of course, to use the cheapest of the cheapest for its basket. The other way to go is to get an average cheaper price where all cheapest offerings from operators are added, but in a weighted sum by the market share of each operator. And this gives the average price for each basket. Of course, we wanted to evaluate this study, this methodology, and of course with Greece as a central point in the methodology. So we went to compare Greece with other 5 countries in the European Union: Belgium, Czech Republic, Denmark, Poland, and Portugal. For mobile and fixed, we see that in mobile, these markets, 4 out of these 6 markets are 3 operators markets. The other 2, Denmark and Poland, have 4 major operators. In fixed, all markets are 3 operators market, except Poland that has 4. And the results, the ranking of the countries, first in mobile, we consider ranking using the cheapest plan per basket and the average per basket using the weighted sums based on market shares that I discussed earlier. In case where the purchasing power parity is used to adjust price levels, we see that Greece on the mobile side ranks 4th in both cases, and when there is no adjustment with regards to purchasing power parity, Greece ranks 3rd. If we go to see some more details, we consider the ranking of countries using cheapest plans and no adjustment as regards purchasing power parity. In this case, we see Greece overall ranked 3rd. Greece is ranked 3rd as regards the tariff pricing score, ranks 5th as regards the network performance rank, so this means lower quality of service compared to other countries, and ranks 2nd as regards network investment score. So these 2 offset most probably one another, and Greece ends up with an overall rank of 3. And we see that Greece keeps this position in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd quarter of the year 24. In fixed markets, similar, we did exactly the same. And as regards cheapest and average prices adjusted with purchasing power parity, Greece is ranked 5th in both cases, and when there is no adjustment as regards purchasing power parity, Greece ranks 4th. And if we see some more analysis on this, again, this is cheapest offering per basket and no adjustment as regards purchasing power parity. We see that Greece overall ranks 4th. As regards tariff pricing rank, it ranks 3rd. Network performance rank is very bad for Greece, ranks 6th in this comparison, and as regards investment ranks 4th. This is mainly the result of the fact that Greece remains a copper-based country as regards fixed network. We have seen investments recently in fiber. We achieve now above 40% coverage with FTTH, but still the take-up of FTTH is around 10%. So this explains the very bad performance in network performance score and less to the network investment score. Again, Greece keeps the same position for Q1, Q2, Q3. This methodology, just before closing, this methodology has been implemented as a customized tool by Tarifica, and we will continue running this exercise because it helps us derive very, very useful conclusions and help us identify possible policy and regulatory actions to improve our situation. The last years, we see an improvement in prices in Greece, also in quality of service, but we also need to see where we stand compared to other countries. So this is a very useful tool. It allows us to run many different scenarios in very short time. And maybe one sentence as last conclusion. I believe that comparing only price levels without considering quality of service, network deployment costs, and maybe some other factors we'll see in the future does not transmit exactly the right picture in these comparisons among different countries. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kostas. Any questions? I mean, you have a little bit of time to type them, or can you just mention you want to ask a question in the question form, and then I can open your mic. In the meantime, maybe I'll start. So, first question. I mean, we see speed can be sometimes as having a big value in some countries and not at all in others. And even for Singapore, you see kind of a convergence. I mean, that's the gap is diminishing over time. So what to expect here? I mean, is that price premium going to stay or not? I mean,
well, first of all, I forgot to mention that quality of service data speeds. We use UCLA data for quality of service in this exercise. So this is crowdsourcing. Now, as regards whether it makes sense to stay and pay more for higher quality of service, in some cases it makes sense. It depends on I would say, on the financial situation, the economic situation of each country and the consumers, the purchasing power, how much the consumers want to spend for electronic communications. If the salaries in a country or the purchasing power allows, of course, it makes sense to stay and give priority to higher quality of service, higher speeds, download, upload, close to the peak, lower latency. This is also very important. If the general economic situation is not very good, the purchasing power, the salaries in a country are not high enough, then there is a different perspective for the consumers. They would go for the performance that is necessarily required and would not pay premium to go higher. So it depends. And this is what we see, and this is what we see in Greece. I mentioned earlier about FTTH take-up. In my opinion, one of the key issues that keep take-up of FTTH in Greece around 10%, maybe a little bit higher, but still at these levels, is the fact that FTTH offerings are expensive. If I can live with 100 megabit per second of VDSL compared to fiber, I would stay with this one. There are not so many reasons why I should pay a premium to move to FTTH.
Okay, and I'll do a second question before moving to Will. So Will, maybe you can prepare to share your screen. So we've seen the situation, especially on fixed. I mean, in the indicator is quite low for Greece. What do you expect, like for next year or next 2 years? I mean, do you expect it can catch up really significantly, because that's really the one impacting. I mean, the ranking. I mean, a lot. I mean,
Well, when I started in 2018 at the Hellenic Telecommunications and Post Commission, FTTH coverage of Greece was 0% in a household. Coverage, not take-up. What we have seen after 6 years is that we reached coverage of 40%, maybe higher. So this means that we managed to create the right regulatory environment to attract some investments. And there have been a series of measures in these directions, like the introduction of NGA bottom-up model that brought predictability in the market, our new market analysis that includes some deregulation provisions in it, and a number of measures. So this improved the investment environment for Greece, and we see this improvement in coverage. Then we move to the demand, the take-up side. Indeed, as I said, we are still around 10%, a little bit than 10%. We need to incentivize demand. But this means that we need to make FTTH services competitively priced to converge to copper prices, or to incentivize using public subsidies. And there is, again, a new gigabit voucher project in Greece that will start soon, that will incentivize the take-up of FTTH services by subsidizing the connection, one-off costs for FTTH, plus part of the expenses per month for 2 years. So using this kind of policy approaches, I expect take-up to be improved. One key point, and this has to do with the whole European Union. Actually, we have been discussing this a little bit earlier before in BEREC plenary meeting before I joined our meeting here. Copper switch off is key for the adoption of FTTH, but we need to make sure that there will be competitively priced alternatives for end users.
thank you very much, Kostas. Thank you.
Apologies for interrupting. If not a problem, I would like to leave the meeting and go back to the plenary meeting. Thank you so much for having me in your webinar.
Thank you.
See you soon. Bye.
So we've talked a lot about fixed, I mean, with Kostas right now, and obviously we switched before. So now in the second part of today, we're going to talk much more about mobile with two very different angles, with two very different types of markets. So we're going to start with emerging markets before moving to 5G with PAL. Will, the floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you, Vincent. And I wanted to thank all of those who came and joined us this morning to learn and discuss a little bit more about trends in telecom pricing and telecoms offerings globally. And I think this is a very exciting event to be a part of. So I'm going to speak briefly about some innovative offers we're seeing coming out of emerging markets. But before I do, I wanted to speak a little bit about the nature of the mobile environment within these sort of emerging and up-and-coming markets. I think many people have the natural instinct to consider emerging markets as, somewhere along the same track as the advanced markets in the world, and just 1 to 2 to 3 steps removed. So, essentially what you're seeing in a place like South Korea today, you might see in a place like Sierra Leone in 5 years. But what we have seen from our work with providers and regulators in these countries is it's really the mobile environment in these countries has evolved in many ways on a parallel track. So because they're mobile first markets, and because the mobile device plays a much more central role in the lives of every civilian, of every citizen there, you're seeing a lot more activity in the mobile plan development space. and in the primacy of the mobile device in terms of all sorts of commercial transactions. So in many ways, there's much more interplay and back and forth where some innovation can start on the emerging market side and then transition into the advanced markets as much as vice versa. So that's something we're going to be studying right now. So as we get into this, we thought it would be a good way to talk a little bit, to give a little background for those of you who are not as familiar with the kind of baseline conditions for these types of prepaid dominated markets. So for the plan and pricing environment, there are essentially two primary models that we're seeing, and I want to talk briefly about each of these. So first is the standard model, and this is the one I would assume more of you are familiar with. So in this model, consumers will purchase, usually in cash, cards at their local vendors. Now, these won't just be retail locations of their provider, but these could be small stores, roadside vendors, things of that nature. And they'll essentially buy credits in the form of scratch-off cards, which will then be uploaded onto their phones. Now, these credits in these countries in many ways form a form of currency or credit where they can be transferred between family members. They can even be sent as payment for services. And they're, in many ways, the baseline digital currency for many citizens in these countries. So once these credits are uploaded onto the phone, consumers were going to visit a USSD menu. This essentially means they're going to enter a specific code onto their phone. You can see an example of one of these down below here. And from this menu, they'll be able to see the current plans and prices that are available from their provider and select them. Now, these top-ups are generally going to be on a daily basis, sometimes a several-day basis. There'll be short-term plans. We're not talking about a long-run postpaid plans. Generally, we're talking about very short-term, low-cost offers that are topped up on a daily or weekly basis. Now, importantly, the last thing I'm going to share about this is just these plans, prices, and promotions. While some of them will be covered on the operator's websites or in brochures that are available in stores, the vast majority of them are just entered digitally on this USSD menu, which is only accessible from a device on said operator's network. So potentially competitors, regulators, and other industry actors don't have visibility to the full plan and pricing landscape unless they have a device that's activated and looking at these USSD menus. Now, the second area here we find a lot more exciting, and this is where we see a lot of the dynamism in this market right now, and this is the sort of customized mobile offering menu. The baseline is the same, so the credits are still purchased on the stores and then uploaded into the user's phones. But instead of waiting for their customers to log in to their USSD menus to top up, operators are actively targeting them with promotions via SMS. So these are being sent out directly to the consumers. And the key here is that they're targeted on two separate levels. So one is we've seen them targeted on consumer behaviors. So users who are using a particularly high amount of data or using streaming specific services are going to be targeted for higher value, higher dollar figure offers, and particularly those focused more on data. On the other hand, lower cost users who are more budget conscious, users who maybe focus more on voice or just using it as a WhatsApp connection are going to see lower value, lower cost offers being targeted to them. And then the second here is that they're also targeted based on attempts to optimize network load. So for instance, if you're seeing a customer who based on their geographic data has been frequently traveling in an area where you're having very low usage, and you have a lot of underused network capacity, you may target them with particularly low-cost offers for data streaming on a short-term basis so that you can basically try to capitalize on some of the underutilized network capacity. So we think this is a very exciting model, and we think it's much moving the operator business model to much more of an Uberized style, demand-based pricing, usage-based pricing, where operators can be more nimble and try to better utilize their resources to command higher returns from customers. But the results of both of these models is that competitors and regulators and other industry actors essentially have no visibility on the pricing and competitive landscape in their their ecosystem. They can obviously look at the success of their own offers and use that as a benchmark to try to guide how to shape future promotions, but they have less visibility on what their competitors are doing, since all of this traffic is essentially happening on a one-to-one basis between the customer and the provider of their network. So here at Tarifica, we were basically confronted with this challenge by several of our clients who operate in this type of environment and wanted to have a better window into what their competitors were doing, and so that then they could develop offers to respond to them. So as Vincent mentioned in our introduction, this is where we turn to try to develop our new plan detector solution. This essentially is a mobile application that is loaded onto phones that are located in the country. So if you're operating in Botswana, these phones would be in Botswana in different areas, and they can be deployed in one location at the operator's headquarters, or they can be deployed at multiple locations throughout the country to test some of this usage-based and location-based pricing. The phones then automatically imitate customer usage, so you can have some phones that are running YouTube, you can have some phones that are uploading photos onto Instagram, you can have phones that are doing chats on WhatsApp, sending text messages, making direct calls, and all of this is happening on an ongoing automated basis. Each of the SMS that are then sent to these phones are automatically captured and uploaded into a backend database on our side, where we can then see which offers are coming in, categorize them in a usable way. And then finally, on a regularized basis, these phones will log into the USSD menu to capture what's going on above the line, what are the baseline offerings from the operators. And then finally, all this information is loaded into a CI delivery platform for the client. So once this has been developed, we put in place at the initial build out phase a pilot program with a prospect who we co-developed this with to basically look at what was going on in this market and see how active this below the line atmosphere was. So for this initial study, it was in an emerging and prepaid dominated market. We ran the study over the course of 4 months. We had 3 separate types of consumer profiles that were put in place. So a data streamer, someone who was using a large amount of data on a regular basis, rapidly recharging. We had a regular recharger, so essentially your baseline consumer who keeps some credits on their phone, occasionally uses some features, but is not a very active consumer. And then finally a dormant user, an active line on the network, but one that is not rapidly recharging. And then each of these phones did weekly checks of the USSD menus to see what was going on there. So what did we find? What was the takeaway from this study? We could look at this was a very highly active market. So over the course of the 4 months, we had 351 total offers received by these 3 phones. There was a wide diversity of offers. So while there was many repeats, there was 116 unique promotions that were pushed during this time. There was a high frequency of a couple selected promotions. So these were your focused offers by the operators. So these were sent. The most common offer was sent 16 times across the 3 phones. As you would expect, the highest value user received the most promotions. So the data streamer, which you can see here, received the most promotions over the period. It even increased its promotions over the period, getting a total of 1.3 messages per day. Interestingly, the regular recharger that had the sort of very static but constant usage had the fewest offers, so only about 1 message every other day. And then finally, there was also pretty frequent changes to these USSD menus. We saw 33 different changes over the 4 months. So it was a very active landscape. And since this time, we've moved to expand this study. So now we're looking at multiple locations across the country, and we're expanding to more types of consumer usage in the profiles. And lastly, how does this, how did this show up for our client? We could see essentially a timeline calendar where you could see which profiles were being targeted each day, how many messages were coming in. And you can see from a demand-based perspective, there'd be days where the network utilization was high and you'd see no messages for any of the phones. And then there'd be days where you'd see a large number of messages. And you get a breakdown of each promotion type based on the day and a breakdown of each of the promotions. So with that, we're very excited about this and looking to expand in the future. And I'd like to turn things back over to Vincent and Pal. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move now directly to Pao. Again, if you have questions, please share them in the Q&A form. Pao, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Vincent. Let me share my screen. Hopefully you can see that on full screen now.
Yeah, even though I can see the right side with your...
You can see that. Okay, let me see if I can, because I've got two screens. Stop and share again. How about now?
That's better. Yeah, that's full screen.
Perfect. Right, so let me just try and summarize as quickly as I can the extensive amount of research that we have done in GSMA, and specifically in GSMA Intelligence, which is the think tank, the research and analysis unit of GSMA around the topic of 5G monetization. First, the context. So 5G has been the fastest, has seen the fastest profile in terms of adoption when we compare it to previous generations of mobile technology. Here we have the latest data. So as of today, we have approximately a market penetration rate of around 20+% globally. Obviously, it's a lot higher in some markets. If we compare it quarter by quarter to the speed at which previous technologies like LTE and 3G were adopted globally, we can see on this chart that the rate of 5G adoption has been actually significantly faster. That's explained by a number of factors. Prices have been quite low. Handset availability when it comes to 5G devices, pretty widely available. At the same time, from the supply side of things, the transition from a 4G or an LTE network to a 5G non-standalone network is a relatively easier transition than we have seen in previous generations. So all these have played and explained part of this quite quick trend in terms of 5G adoption worldwide. Despite that, the key question that remains on the table is the extent to which these investments and this adoption is being translated into greater revenue for mobile operators. So this question of how can we, as telco operators, monetize better 5G is quite central. And that's why we have been looking at it in some detail. Here you have the results of the 5G, sorry, this is a broader consumer survey that GSMA carries out every year. One of the questions that we ask consumers worldwide is to what extent they are prepared to pay more for the next generation of mobile services. In the case of 5G, what we can see is that on average, consumers globally are prepared to pay some more for 5G, but not a lot more. So we see this 5% additional willingness to pay. And I guess, if we think about it from our own experience as consumers, it is not particularly surprising, because 5G to date, what's essentially been giving us is essentially faster speeds, but not much more than that. So it does actually link quite directly to some degree of what the expectations are. So with that context, I guess moving on to the key element of this presentation, key question is how we can better monetize the 5G network capabilities and the type of services that 5G can provide to consumers. And I'll focus on the consumer side of things by discussing two specific elements, which are speed-based tariffs on one hand, which we are seeing start emerging in some markets and seeing some significant adoption. And also I'll talk a bit about some of the new types of bundling that we are seeing with new services offered on 5G networks. Before that, I just make a quick. I'll make a quick reference to the two other big areas of 5G monetization that are showing positive signs. One is the provision of home broadband through 5G networks or 5G fixed wireless access. The other one is the growing enterprise opportunity that we are seeing with many telco operators seeing quite a bit of revenue growth in that space. Starting with the enterprise opportunity, these are the results of a recent quite detailed modeling exercise that we carried out to understand to what extent this trend that we have seen in the last 3-4 years of growth in B2B enterprise services from telco operators, to what extent we can expect this to continue going forward. What we see on this chart is essentially a market sizing or addressable market calculation for the key areas in the broader adjacent tech space where telcos have been making a move or playing, potentially putting some services on cloud, edge computing, IoT services, security services. We do estimate in 2023 an overall market in these segments of in excess of 1 trillion globally, of which 400 billion are addressable by telco operators. That doesn't mean that these 400 billion will become revenues. It means that there is a potential for telco operators to play into that space. Obviously, it's a crowded space. There's strong competition from some of the hyperscalers, cloud providers, although there are some competitive advantages that operators can play. And here's the important role of things like network APIs that can provide some revenue growth in this space for telecom operators. The second area I wanted to mention before going into the consumer segment is the home broadband 5G fixed wireless access revenue stream. This I think has to be called out as a success story since 5G was launched. So approximately almost half of the mobile operators that launched 5G have already a fixed wireless access offering. And this actually has translated into quite significant revenue growth in this space. And so in just 2 years, we've seen revenue growth of around 30% for 5G fixed wireless access services. And quite importantly, there is still quite a lot of headroom for that to continue going forward because the adoption rate is relatively low when we look at the overall home broadband market. So there's potential for that to grow going forward. Okay, so we've talked about the enterprise opportunity. We've talked about home broadband. These are ways in which operators can monetize 5G investments. But still, the bulk of the revenues for most telco operators are in the 5G, in the consumer segment, essentially. To better understand how operators can monetize that, we carried out an exercise drawing and leveraging Tarifica data. So we obtained from Tarifica approximately 4,000 tariffs across 40 markets globally. This actually covers, in terms of 5G connections, 95% of connections. So it really can be looked at as a global study. And what we see, just initial picture from that, about 60% of tariffs are capable of providing 5G services, 40% do not. And we do see a price differential. That's a bare average, right? So we compare tariffs that can offer 5G versus tariffs that do not offer 5G. There is a roughly $10 per month differential. What explains that? Well, we tend to see that 5G offerings include greater allowances, faster speeds. They tend to have more bundles of additional services. So all of this will explain to a degree this differential. What we actually did to better understand that and to be able to pinpoint what are the actual features that are driving this additional value is we did something, a type of analysis. I won't bore you with the methodological aspects, but something called hedonic pricing analysis. This is a regression-based technique that allows us to isolate the contribution to the overall price of the tariff of the individual features of the tariff. And I'll show you the results of that in the next few slides. First thing to call out, I think probably, again, unsurprisingly, is that data is one of the key value drivers for consumers and is one of the aspects that's still being monetized clearly by telecom operators worldwide. So what we do see here, this is actually a simulation. So the way in which that can be interpreted is if we keep everything else in a tariff equal, that means the advertised speed, whether it's prepay or postpay, the type of bundles that are being offered. If we keep all that equal and we just increase the data allowance, what is the effect of that increase on the overall value of that tariff? And what we do see here clearly is that more data delivers more value to consumers and therefore more revenue to operators. And the effect can be, if we move from in this analysis here, from the lower bucket to the higher end, this effect can be quite significant. So contrary to this idea that all tariffs are unlimited and that volumes are not being monetized, well, actually they are being monetized. And it is not insignificant. The other thing that we looked at as part of this analysis was the more traditional voice and SMS services with, I think, again, quite intuitive findings. So when it comes to voice, there is still some marginal value that operators and consumers see from that, but it's not huge. So a tariff that doesn't include any voice minutes to a tariff that includes unlimited voice minutes, there's a $3 price differential. So it's not nothing, but it's not very large. When it comes to SMSs, actually, there isn't any statistically significant effect of adding SMSs as an additional feature. So again, intuitively, I think that makes sense. Most people these days in both developed and developing markets are not using SMSs anymore. So this is consistent with that consumer trend. Okay, so far that's been looking at the effect of volumes. What we then did, and that's, I would say, personally, the most interesting part of this analysis, we tried to understand better the effect of speeds. And the way we did that is we essentially threw all the tariffs that we had in our sample globally into 3 buckets. One bucket called speed-based tariffs. So these are essentially tariffs that offer unlimited amounts of data, but with different speed tiers. So you'll have, say, unlimited data, but speeds up to 10 megabits per second, up to 20, up to 50, up to 100, etc. So this is a speed-based tariff. We then have volume-based tariffs, where volumes are what determine the price of the tariff, and speeds are basically on a best endeavors basis. And finally, we have hybrid tariffs, which combination of these features. Most tariffs today still are volume-based tariffs. So 70%, roughly 70% of tariffs globally are volume-based, but there is quite significant variation between markets. So if we look at Finland, actually 95% of tariffs in Finland are speed-based tariffs. Same to a lesser extent, but in Switzerland, Norway, Thailand, more than 40% of all tariffs are speed-based. Even the case of Spain, where volume-based are still predominant, but there is like almost a third of all tariffs being offered are speed-based tariffs. Interestingly, and that's what we see on the right-hand side, we then plotted this information to the levels of revenue growth per user in each market. And what we find is something quite interesting. So what we see is that those markets that have a greater proportion of speed-based tariffs happen to be markets that have experienced the fastest ARPU growth in the last 2 years. Here is, I think the axis is looking at the 1-year growth. We looked at the 2-year growth, 3-year growth. The trend is the same. So we tend to see that actually these markets that have a greater proportion of speed-based tariffs tend to be markets that are growing faster. So is there a causal link there? We don't know, but it is quite suggestive that there's something there that operators are being able to monetize quite effectively. The way this translates, again, same exercise that we saw for volumes, but apply to speeds. In these markets where speed-based tariffs are predominant or have a significant adoption, we do see these speeds actually being monetized quite effectively. So transitioning from the lower speed tier to the higher speed tier, and again, so this is not an average, it's basically a simulation saying everything else being equal, so it's a like-for-like comparison. Operators are able to monetize $14 extra from moving one customer from the lower tier speed to the higher tier speed. That's quite significant. Also, interestingly, these results do not hold in markets that have lower degrees of speed-based tariffs being offered. So it suggests that there might be a trade-off there, that you can monetize volumes or you can monetize speeds, but doing both at the same time doesn't seem to be happening right now. And then just to conclude this presentation, the second feature that I like to highlight, or the last feature I like to highlight when it comes to 5G consumer monetization, is the question of bundling. Bundling is not new. It's been around in mobile for a long time. What is new, though, is the types of bundles that are being offered. We're seeing things like cloud gaming being bundled into mobile tariffs. We're seeing things like live broadcast services that deliver a certain guaranteed or minimum uplink level that can be used. It's quite niche, but can be used for things like social media broadcasting. We're also seeing some boost packages that are offered on top of the normal tariff that guarantee for a period of time a minimum degree of network performance. So all these things actually are new, and we're seeing them being offered as part of bundles in quite a few markets. Just to bring this a bit more to life, one example is the case of AIS in Thailand. You can see here a bunch of content packages being offered for the customers of AIS. On the right-hand side is an example of this accelerator speed boost package that consumers can pay for, and it's going to give them extra speeds for a period of time. And with that, I will conclude. If you want to find out more, all this information and a lot more data and findings are available on this 5G consumer report. If you have your phone with you, just please feel free to take a peek on the screen, and that will take you directly onto the download site. Thank you very much, and back to you, Vincent.
Thank you, Pal. So just to say it again, I mean, all speakers have agreed to share their slides, so we'll be able to send that if needed. Also, I'm not going to send probably everything to everyone, but I mean, we'll interact with you. We'll send the replay, and if you are interested by some of the slides, we can share. Maybe a few questions before we close. The first one, I mean, you showed earlier that like 68% is of offers are volume based, and like 9% are speed based. Have you seen any evolution in those numbers? Maybe it's the first time you've done it, but is the speed based proportion rising?
It's a very good question. I think it's something that would be valuable to take another look at. So this data is from the last quarter of last year. So it's been 12 months since we took that snapshot with you. I mean, we do have some anecdotal evidence that we have seen speed-based tariffs being offered in quite a few markets in the last 12 months. So I would expect the number to be seeing an upward trend. But no, I mean, I think that's something that I think it's out there and needs to be looked at. But it'd be interesting to investigate further.
And somehow the same question on the experience. So that's been developed for a longer time, I'll say. Do you see any evolution in there? I mean, or is it like specific to a few countries, and there are countries in which there's not that thing anyway, so it's going to remain a local a local particularity here and in some areas, but not going to extend to Europe. I mean, you mentioned a few European countries, but I'm based in France. I mean, we don't have that for sure.
No, and it is. I mean, I think there are regulatory factors that have been an impediment to some of these more innovative services that sometimes play around with things like speeds and quality of service and build some guaranteed performance that are not necessarily forbidden by regulation, but there are some, I guess, regulatory gray areas as to the extent to which these would be at foul with some regulations at the European level that may have played a role in limiting the launch, or at least the testing of some of these. So many of these tariffs are by nature quite innovative. They need some testing, and some of that has actually happened a lot more in some Asian markets, even South American markets, like Brazil, for example. That's quite a significant variety of different types of tariffs. So yeah, I guess the jury is out. I would have similar reservations as you, Vincent, as to the extent to which we will see this happening in the immediate future in Europe, but clearly it's quite a vibrant moving market in other parts of the world.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. So we're going to close the webinar. So obviously, if you have any questions, remarks, if you want slides, anyway, well, I'll be in touch with all of the ones that have really joined today to share the links, to share a few slides and more if needed. And don't hesitate if you have more questions, more on the details of what we presented. We're happy to interact. Thank you again also to our speakers, and see you soon. And have a great holiday season also. Obviously, it's a little bit early, but we won't have another one before the Christmas break. So thank you very much. Oh, there are questions. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's just people that want the slides. Yeah, it will be possible to get the slide. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.